Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Bourne. If you're enjoying these innovation insights, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss a future episode. By following Innovation Meets Leadership, you are getting access to trends, strategies, and of course, incredible innovators. And today is no different. I'm so excited to sit down and talk to Ron Crabtree. He is the founder and CEO of MetaOps as well as MetaExperts. And this was established in 2002 with over 30 years of experience. Ron's experience extends from change management to facilitation, communications. And what I love is that he really focuses on operational excellence and transformational growth. So we're going to talk very deeply about those two topics today. Welcome to the podcast, Ron.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes. Well, I understand you have your own podcast too. So in addition to getting your backstory, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you cover on your podcast as well.
All right. Well, I'll do that. So the backstory is I grew up in manufacturing. I'm in Michigan, and Michigan's kind of a manufacturing mecca. And I lived in California as a young person, ended up working for Disney, their manufacturing division of Disney. And we were ramping up for building the Epcot theme park this is back in, I'm dating myself. It opened in 1982, right? So this is 79 and 80 as we're ramping up for that. And we were doing program evaluation review technique on computers in 1979. So I was an early adopter of, leading organizations' best practices for how do you get big scale things done. And it was a great formative thing. And started going to night school, 17 years of night school. Went to work right out of high school, as a laborer, and then worked my way up through the ranks. And came back to Michigan and got involved with the automotive supply chain and materials management and operations, plant manager job in there, materials management jobs, and got moved to Detroit back in 96 with United Technologies Automotive to work in corporate purchasing during Target and Kaizen costing. And from there moved into management consulting with Grant Thornton. At one time I ran the Oracle practice out of Detroit. I worked for a time with the world's largest lean manufacturing consulting company, mainly ex-Toyota folks doing accelerated lean deployment at Ford of all places. And then started my own company and have been very focused on thought leadership since. I've co-authored several books. I wrote Lean Culture and Apex ASCM magazine for 14 years running. And one of the things I've done, which has been a lot of fun, is we started up the Metapod podcast a year ago with focusing on the three common challenges that primarily, manufacturers face, but just about everybody, is the forever labor shortage. The fact that the growth of the workforce is going to continue to be negative in years to come as compared, decade over decade. The digital transformation and digitization of work, and then just needing to do more with less, and the unending pressure to figure out how to waste less, get things done with less logistics, less facilities, less people, less space, right? Getting things done. So that's the quick backstory.
Well, I love it because I feel like we could dig into each of those areas you just mentioned, and each of those could be like a 30-minute podcast. They really could, right? But I want to talk to you today specifically about looking at kind of the future of logistics and operations. I'd love to know how you see emerging technologies reshaping supply chain and what steps you're thinking companies should take to stay ahead of the curve here.
Well, I consider myself a fairly sophisticated consumer of this topic. There's a backstory there. One of our customers came to us 5 years ago now, and large e-learning platform, global e-learning program for leadership and development training for all of their corporate customers around the world. They wanted an all-new digital transformation awareness program. So I pulled together a team of the MetaExperts in our community, and we basically researched what are all the elements of that. There was like 30 plus different elements to consider at the time, which has changed already in digital transformation. And artificial intelligence is just one of a whole list of things. And we built out 5 functional courses, which technologies really impact marketing, sales, product development, which impact supply chain, which impact operations and quality, which impact internal finance and IT, and then finally HR and change management. If you think about supply chain specifically, I'm going to cheat here and look at my list because it's hard to remember all this. There's certain things that really hit supply chain that are part of the picture here, right? So AI, right at the top of the list. additive manufacturing, advanced materials, the Internet of Things, edge sensor technologies, autonomous supply chain technologies. I'll talk more about that later, an example of that. Cloud computing, blockchain, performance risk management, just lots and lots of pieces to that. So it's a big thing that, from a supply chain perspective, you cannot afford not to pay attention. And I would also argue that, there's no silver bullet cure, right? So you have to really get started with process, really understand where the opportunities are to improve performance, and then zero in on and be very tactical and surgical about how we apply technologies in supply chain. And I had a guest on one of my podcasts, Eric Browning. He works for a little company called Uber Freight, and he's really keen on all this stuff. And one of the things that he said to me that really got my attention, if we think about applying, these sorts of technologies in supply chains and logistics, for example, one of the huge headaches is if I'm sitting at the firing line, figuring out how to get that pallet or that LTL load moved. Well, there's a lot of considerations, right? There's the cost, there's the liability of the transport, it's their compliance, are they going to do it safely? Are we going to damage the goods? So there's lots and lots of moving pieces. And can we get AI so smart it could actually make the right choice every time? And the answer is probably not, because there's so many moving pieces in the decision. But what Eric pointed out, I thought is spot on, is leverage AI to go out and collect and bring to you, based on the criterion and the different aspects of this move, what are all the trade-offs and things I need to consider, but still engage that human mind of making the call in the moment. So think about it this way. I could spend 30 minutes in the old world figuring out my choices and then make a decision. Whereas using AI assist, you can get all the choices almost instantly and then make a quality decision. So the point here is, and this is endemic, is, is AI going to replace everybody? No. But here's the thing. Worker plus AI is going to always outperform worker without AI.
That's right.
And that's the thing I'd like to place the thought in. So after that, it's around automation of key processes.
Yeah. Well, I want to make a comment.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I want to make a comment about that because I think what you said is really important. And I'd like to slow down on that point, because I think that a lot of people, want to have the conversation about AI, but we're not giving up our ability to do the thinking. I think that's the part that needs to be further expressed and understood, that we can't just hand over all decisioning to AI. You still need a human who's able to critically think through the options that AI brings back and says, okay, 5 options have come back. What about a 6th that the AI didn't think about? Let's look at that. Let's have it re-look through that data with the 6th option and then bring that back and see. So somebody needs to be able to critically think through the data that comes to them in order to make better decisions. And I think that that's a really important point. So we can't, check out and just say AI is going to do this. You still need that thinker, that person that can solve strategic problems at the center of some of these problems you're talking about.
Yeah, very true. And one of the challenges with AI that I keep hearing from the experts is it's only as good as the data set. It's only as good as the data set it's fed to. And typically it's lagging information, right? So if you need decisions made on what's happening in the here and now, unless you've got super great abilities at modeling and having built a brain, if you will, in AI to do all that, it's got to be looked at by a human being and second guessed, because you're going to get in trouble because it can't know everything it needs to know. It just can't. So that's super important. Another area is automating key processes in supply chain. And I'll give an example. We're a partner with a company called Orchestro Software, and they put together a pretty cool platform with artificial intelligence mixed with gaming theory to be able to do reverse markets, right? So you can basically come up with suggested pricing, take vendors you've never worked with through a bidding process and getting to the right price, and then bringing decision support forward to the purchasing team. Again, not making the decision, but bringing forward the intelligence. And what's happening with that is, what would normally take months to accomplish by a team of people, you can do in days with a handful of people. So the productivity of the procurement workforce is astronomically improved. And then the business results with respect to, cost out, better suppliers being sourced to avoid what's this thing called tariffs going on in the current, right? All the trade policy stuff, what do you do about that? And that's one of the powerful things we can leverage technologies. If you built the models or have access to the tools, you can get through those what-if analysis pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Here again, you've got to have the data, right? So if you don't understand your cost basis, you don't have to understand the contracts and how all those costs can and could impact you upstream from your suppliers, right? And downstream to your customers. It goes both ways because will your customers accept and deal with all that too? Big question. You've got to be able to quickly model those things. So that's a real powerful application of technologies as well. And if you spill into operations, which is kind of kissing cousins to a supply chain, you've got robotic process automation, automation of core processes for, basic decision support, using lean thinking processes to identify, where are the sweet spots in our processes where we waste a lot of time and energy, we spend a lot of money, where we have lots of delays, and really focus how can we leverage technologies to close gaps at very specific points in the process. And I can talk more about that later. And then we think about Six Sigma and total quality management. Wow, what a great opportunity because the number one root cause for most defective information or product is people because we are naturally fallible. 100% human inspection at best is 85% effective. Well, computers are way more effective if we can model it and set them up correctly to help automate, right, the decision support for people. So that's how you take Six Sigma total quality management thinking and how do we link that to our digital transformation approach?
That's really good. As we're talking about this, I wonder what are some of the common pitfalls that companies face when they're adopting some digital technologies? I feel like obviously there's a way to successfully integrate some of these things in, and then there's ways where people maybe are not maximizing the opportunity. Maybe we could talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I think there's two major reasons why organizations struggle. Because the fact is, and you can go out and look at, the Gartner data and the big consulting firms' data, 80%, maybe more, of digital transformation efforts fail outright or never deliver on the promise that was made. And I think there's two core reasons for this. The first is I think organizations tend to have a poor understanding of their core business processes and really understanding surgically where to apply digital transformation and convert to the measured benefit of doing that. So this is where I would advocate strongly, and many of the guests on my podcast would say the same thing. Experts in how do you actually succeed in digital transformation implementation is using basic things like value stream mapping as a baseline to truly understand processes. And I've actually have a project underway at the moment with one of the customers, $1 billion automotive supplier, and they're about to make a spend decision on a couple $1 million of product lifecycle management software and integration of data. And they're like, so where's the ROI for this? How do we understand what to do? So the project I'm kind of walking them through now is using an advanced form of value stream mapping to get at the true activity-based costing understanding of where do we spend the time and money for our resources internally, where are the defective information being manifested and occurring in the processes, and then exactly where we need the PLM software to come to the rescue in terms of instead of 5 systems to do this task, I need 1, right? Instead of, chasing down information, I can have it come to me where I need it at the right time. It really challenged the PLM provider to solve very specific business problems where we can actually understand the monetization of that. We're using 10 engineers to do that today, and we can do it with 3 in the future. That is pretty easy to understand. If we can turn around a quote in 3 weeks today and we need to do it in 2 days, which is the reality for these folks, like an engineering change in the automotive industry, the OEMs are pushing this down of if we have an engineering change, I can't wait 3 weeks to get what the cost implication is. You have to tell me in 2 days. And if you're using a 3-week process, guess what? You're leaving all kinds of money on the table of, unrecovered costs from doing engineering changes as an example. So I could go on a long time about that. And then the second area is not understanding the change management challenge. And it
Mm,
really comes down to the evergreen thinking of business process management. It's people, process, and technology. And it's in that order very purposefully. And if you're not familiar with BPM or business process management, that'd be a good thing to put on your list of things to learn more about. But it's an evergreen discipline and it's around really understanding the process, linking people in and making them part of the discovery and identifying where to digitize and why we're digitizing, getting their buy-in, making them part of the decision-making process, and then having them own the change in skills required to be able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, I love that last point. I think that that often is the missed part of all of this work is what is the change management piece, and it's often shoved in at the end as an afterthought, but it really should be it should be the first thing that's thought about when a project like this is embarked upon.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the leadership side of things. What are some strategies you think would be effective for them as they think about highly complex environments, highly complex systems? Now we're beginning to add, AI to the forefront of this. Obviously, robotics has been in the mix for a while now. From an innovation and leadership standpoint, how should leaders who are thinking about evolving or maybe even disrupting the way they do things and really moving forward, right, to kind of be at parity with a lot of organizations and where they're headed, what are some of the leadership challenges that they may face along this journey as they're trying to get everyone to come on this path with them?
That's a massive challenge. And I think that, we're going to take this at the enterprise view versus dropping down into a very specific example. We can move toward that a bit later. You have to step back and say, okay, from an innovation perspective, what's our basis of competition? What is it exactly we need to do better in the future to maintain our market share, grow our market share, enter new markets, improve our profitability? But you've got to figure out, why are we doing this, right? Is it speed to market with new products and services? Do we need shorter lead times to keep the customers we have, let alone get new ones? Do we need to have higher quality or a better customer experience for that product or service we provide? What about cost? Are we getting continued cost pressures? I guarantee we're going to get continued cost pressures. So what is it we're actually driving to improve in the performance of the business and use that to guide us? And one of my buddies wrote this really cool book. His name was Jim Gitney, and he wrote this book called Strategy Realized, the Business Hierarchy of Needs. And he does it, puts a really good background around, how do we get at this strategic approach? And he advocates coming up with that most important goal that we need to drive in the organization. I'm back to, that speed to market, the lead time. We got to really, you can't focus on too many things at once because you're doing nothing well at that point. You're not being very laser focused and strategic and surgical around what you're doing. And once you kind of have that overarching most important goal, then we have to align the rest of the organization around what that means. And collaboratively, layer by layer, if you've heard of the policy deployment or Lean Six Sigma called Hoshin Conry, and you have to kind of go layer by layer with, the top management and work your way down through the layers and think about, okay, how do we align people with what we're going to do and make them part of it? I mentioned that earlier, but what's really important is help them understand why and assure that they're buying into the notion that we actually need to do this at all. That's really crucial. And then you can worry about the how and then break it down to, who has to be trained, what does they need to know, what's each person responsible for to measure their success going forward. And I think it's crucial that if you can't get really focused and drill down to and then engage people on the why, the how, and the buy-in, and then make sure we're skilled up and have the tools and methods, right, that people can understand, we just can't be successful.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think again, I mean, part of what you just explained there is change management. It's bringing everyone along the journey with you and not running ahead of everyone, right? And I think depending on your vantage point in the organization, you see different things in industry, you see different things in what you read and kind of the news or the content you consume. And so now you've had a year to think about this. How do you get the rest of your team on the path, right? On par with how you're thinking about where this industry is going. And that requires a change management process and bringing people along with you and getting that buy-in and agreement so that they'll go on the journey. And ultimately, if you're a leader, these people are going to own big pieces of the plan, right? So they
Correct.
now have to be thinking about what you're thinking about. And so often that's not a quick journey. You have to bring them along.
No, it's not a quick journey. I'm having conversations with an RV industry organization, and that's all centered, in Indiana. Is really the hotbed of that. And it happens to be within a couple hours of where I live. And having a conversation with $1 billion, manufacturer of RVs, and there's like, we've got all these long tenured employees, and they've always done piece rate incentive systems, right? That's really endemic in the industry, and we've struggled with, digital transformation awareness. And so we're kind of having that conversation is, how do you break that down, right? and engage people in the why and the how and winning their buy-in and helping them engage in that critical thinking about why do we need to put decision support deeper into the organization. We shouldn't have the workforce bringing us management every single problem to solve. We need to equip them with the skills to do that and the technologies to support them be better at decision support at the point of attack everywhere in the business.
That's so good. Well, kind of in our final segment here, I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about the key roles that are essential for organizations to focus on as they think about streamlining their operations and really driving long-term success. I know that through your experience, you've had the opportunity to see a lot of organizations and see a lot of different roles and how those kind of shift over time.
Yeah, I think there's two answers to that. One would be leadership skills and understanding of the challenge. And that's what I'll be mainly focusing on with this RV company I just mentioned is how do we tool up our leaders to understand these concepts that we're talking about? And then working down through looking at skills, right? So if we need to be, more nimble, more responsive to customers, do we need to be able to bring products to market faster? Do we need to vertically integrate manufacturing as part of our onshoring strategy to avoid tariffs? Blah, blah, blah. There's a long list of things. And I advocate using a technique called versatility diagramming. You can think about it as a skills matrix. And this is for every, position or every function within the company is across the top, we have the skills and abilities and what level they need to know them. Down the left, we have our people, and we kind of map our current state of who knows what and what is they need to develop for today's business. But then more critically is what needs to be different a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now in that future workforce. And then defining that because that gives you your guide of, okay, these are the technologies we need to adopt. These are the skills and abilities that workforce of the future needs to have. As leaders, we have to own that. We have to define the culture, set the roadmap, and then we have to pivot and then engage people in taking us through how do we create the right mindset and empower people to take on part of that future state vision and making it part of what they're doing and why they're doing with personal measures, personal accountability for certain parts of the execution.
That's really good. I feel like as we look ahead at, like you said, the future of the workforce, a lot of the conversations are you need leadership skills, you need communication skills, you need to understand technology, you need to understand kind of the digital pieces that all fit together. And it used to just be true of our CTO or our CIO, but now we're finding it's true of our CMO or HR officer, right? All these different roles, they need to also understand the digital AI implications of the impact on the role that they have, and you no longer can just sit in the seat of technology in order to understand that. You have to have that spanning leadership across the organization to understand tech stacks regardless of your role. So it's interesting, me personally, with a background in technology, it's really fascinating to see that executives are having to come to the table now with that technology component. That wasn't true 10, 15, 20 years ago.
That's a fact. The rate of change is accelerating.
It's powerful. Well, what final thoughts would you have today for our listeners, Ron, as you think about the digital workforce, digital technology, manufacturing, anywhere you want to take that final thought?
Well, a couple things, certainly we mentioned my Metapod podcast, so that's, a great resource that we'd appreciate people checking it out and also following and subscribing and all of that. And then I mentioned this forever labor shortage phenomenon. We're actually kicking off a benchmarking study where we're engaging with organizations to understand what they're doing today and helping them understand what they could be doing. We actually, in the first version of this, 9 different groupings of strategies and techniques we use to deal with this forever labor shortage problem. One of those is digital transformation, right? Another one's becoming an employer of choice. And there's like 24 elements inside that alone. And that's kind of unfolding. And that'll be a resource people can tap into that touches many of these things we talked about. And then finally, and this could be a whole podcast on its own, is skilling up our leaders to understand what it takes to be successful in sustainable change. Having sustainable change happen, in my mind, is a simple formula of do we have discomfort with the current state? In other words, is there a reason to adopt the technology? Secondly, are we clear about the vision? What does it mean exactly? And who's going to need to do what and why? And then finally, do we have the skills and abilities to execute the discomfort and the vision that we have? And you kind of multiply these 3 factors and you find out most cases, we're not in a real good shape when it comes to readiness for sustainable change. And I think that's a core skill any leader in any organization faced with any sort of change could really benefit from.
Wow. Well, thank you, Ron. It's been excellent just listening to you. Besides following your podcast, where else can people find you and follow you?
Well, certainly, I'm very present on LinkedIn, and, I'd love to have you join me on LinkedIn, and then at MetaOps.com or MetaExperts.com. There's links in there to actually get on my calendar if you want to talk about being on my podcast, or if you want to know more about what we talked about today, you can get on my calendar right there.
Ron, thank you so much. It's been a joy to have you and your wealth of knowledge that you bring to the table. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership, and visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.